join the sexual evolution and get ready for Sex is Medicine. Sex is Medicine is your #1 resource for holistic sex education. Explore the connection between sexuality and spirituality, pleasure and personal growth. Discover the art of using pleasure as medicine and reclaim your birthright to more joy, more pleasure, and more satisfaction in every area of your life with Devi Ward.
Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Sex is Medicine. I am your host, Miss Devi Ward Erickson, and sitting beside me this evening is my wonderful husband, Dr. Christopher Erickson.
Hello.
And he is going to help us out this evening and offer his insight and his expertise in our topic for the evening. So you may have noticed that I have been absent since the beginning of the year, and that is because I have been tending to some very important and very precious work. And that has been facilitating the passing of my dear mother. And it's been such a unarticulable, I don't know if that's a word, profound experience that I wanted to share it with you to kind of give you an inside view of what this experience is like. If you haven't had it for yourself, or maybe you have had this experience so you can relate to it, but also because it was a huge surprise to me. So much of what I experienced was a shock. And so for those of you in my audience who have parents who you may need to care for as they age, or are perhaps caring for now, or maybe perhaps you yourself are moving towards your end stages of life, I wanted to share with you some of what I learned through this journey, and some resources and some very valuable support. And just kind of dispel some of the myths and the illusions, because death is not something we talk about openly in this society. And all of or I'll say many of the images that we see of it in media are very, very misleading. So it is shocking in many ways to confront it face to face. And not only is it shocking, but it's also so precious if you have the opportunity to participate in supporting someone through their end of life process, whether that's months or weeks or hours. The profundity of that experience, honestly, it cannot be expressed in words. So I wanted to just do a little bit to shine some light on that. And also share with you, this episode is called The Tantra of Dying Well. And it has been my Tantra practice that allowed me to be able to offer the kind of love and support to my mother that she really needed to have a good death. So in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what a good death looks like. What does that mean to have a good death versus a bad death, or whatever, an unpleasant death? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What are some of the qualities associated with that? Give you some resources that you can research on your own to support your own learning process, because again, I am not an expert in this. This was one profound experience of my life that I'm sharing with you, but I am in no way an expert on the art of dying well. So I want to give you resources from people who actually, have mastery in this or have a degree of expertise in it. And again, share my story and my growth. And my husband, Dr. Erickson, participated. Of course, he's my husband, so he participated in this experience with me, both live in person when he was able to come out to where we were, which was in Michigan, when he was able to come out to be physically present, and then when he wasn't able to be physically present, long distance and on the phone, and just again supporting me with some of the scholastic and academic resources to help support my consciousness in this process. So our story begins with my mom. So my mother, her name was and still is Alexandra Elaine Ward, and she was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer in about 2011, 2012. So by the time they discovered it, it had already metastasized. In 2012, she had a lumpectomy, and that seemed to keep things at bay for a while. She did not do any radiation or chemotherapy at that time. She refused that Western therapy because she didn't believe in it. My mother has always been a proponent of natural health and wellness. And she believed that if she gave her body the support that it needed to heal, that it would heal. So at that time, she refused Western, or what is it, allopathic medicine, and focused on homeopathic medicine or holistic medicines. And she did very well for a year, and then the cancer came back, so to speak, and was in her lymph nodes, and it grew. And so for the next several years, the next six or so years, she kind of went back and forth between doing chemotherapy and allopathic practices and holistic practices to support that healing practice, or those healing methods. And so she ended up working with a really skilled naturopath in Michigan. So this all took place in the Michigan area, and Dr. Roy, Dr. March, and they specialize in cancer treatments and supporting the recipient of chemotherapy and the allopathic medicine, supporting the body in its healing process with holistic methods and naturopathic methods. And they're very, very skilled and very excellent in their craft. And so Mom went many, many years without the cancer spreading, without it, I guess that's the thing with cancer, is you don't want it to spread. So it actually was it was stable for several years. And then in 2017, it started to grow. And then this last year of 2018 was really, 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 it was really difficult. And Mom was desperate, and she tried several experimental drugs and treatments that just completely destroyed her immune system, completely destroyed her, her strength, very devastating. And eventually, over the holidays, the cancer overtook her. She succumbed to it. So December 14th is where my part of this story begins, or where we're coming to the climax of this story. So this was just this past December, and I was sitting in the fireplace behind us, having a glass of red wine, getting ready for our 2-year wedding anniversary trip. And I had the impulse, the intuition, the hit to call my mom. And so she's in Michigan, so she's 3 hours ahead. So I think it was about 3 in the afternoon, our time, and it was about 6 in the afternoon, her time, in the evening, her time. And I called her, and when she answered the phone, she just sounded delirious. And when I was talking with her, I had her on speakerphone, and she wasn't making any sense. She just, I don't know how to describe it. She just sounded delirious. And so I had Chris listen, and he's like, oh, she sounds delirious. So we ended up calling the police to do a wellness check on her. So here's point number 1 that I want to share with you people, is that I had no idea that if you're living 3,000 miles away or even 10 miles away, you can call the police in the area of your loved ones and have them do a wellness check. I did not know that. So some of you may know that, but if you don't know that and you have a loved one who's far away, or it's snowing and you can't get to them, you can call the police and they will do a wellness check to make sure that that person is okay. So that was lesson number 1. I had no idea that was even a possibility. So that was a big relief to me. So I had the police do a wellness check, and I asked them specifically to call me when they got there. Well, Mom had, in the midst of her conversation with us before, had dropped the phone and had hung up. And then when the police got there, she called me back to find out what the heck was going on. And so I was able to talk with the police through her and talk to her and convince them that they needed to call EMS, because Mom presented as fine for most people, but us who knew her knew that she was freaking delirious. So we convinced the police to call EMS with her consent, and EMS came and took her temperature. She had a fever. Anyway, they rushed her to the hospital. Long story short. So she was admitted to the hospital with some kind of infection, which turned out to be sepsis. So keep in mind that this is the night before Christopher and I are going on our 2-year wedding anniversary trip, so that we've planned for months. So we're about to take a ferry to an island the next day, and my mom's in the hospital and we don't know what's wrong with her. So all of the doctors assured us that she was fine. She just had a fever, just take some antibiotics, whatever, it'll be fine. So we left. We went to, Salt Spring Island for our 2-year honeymoon. And during this time, I was in communication with mom's doctors and also her naturopaths. So her naturopaths have a very close relationship because they specialize in end-of-life care. And so they're very, very attentive to her. They were very attentive to her when they were kind of sensing that things were shifting and moving into a different phase for her. So they ended up going to the hospital and they ended up calling me and letting me know that my mom had sepsis and that she had almost died that night. And in fact, if we hadn't called her and sent the Canton police to her, meaning if I had listened to mom, who's like, oh, no, I'm fine, don't do anything. If we had listened to her, she would have been dead by morning. So essentially, we saved her life on December 14th. And in my mind, we saved her life so that we could have the blessing and the grace of what happened over the next several weeks. So during the time that we were still away, we were away for like a week, I'm on the phone with mom, she's in the hospital, and I'm really getting the intuition, like, I need to come out there. Like there's, I need to at least see what's going on because you almost died and you have cancer. And so we need to figure out what's going on. So also, I hope you're able to follow all these threads, but also want to share with you that my mom was very reserved and withholding about her status with her cancer. So she was a lot sicker than she had let any of us know. She was she was a warrior. My mom was fierce and she was going to do it her way. She was, she was fighting this thing and it was her battle. And she didn't really allow any of the rest of us in for whatever reason. Maybe because she was afraid of criticism, maybe because, for whatever reason. But she kept things very close to her chest. And so I didn't really know that by this time the cancer had metastasized to her liver and possibly her brain. So I flew out to Detroit on December 23rd. And I took a cab directly from the airport to my mom's house. This was another change. She used to be able to pick me up from the airport and she wasn't well enough to drive. That was huge. So I walked into her apartment and saw her and took one look at her and realized I could not leave her alone again. At this point, we had not had confirmation that the cancer had metastasized to her brain, but she was frail in a way that I had never seen her before. And I was not going to allow her to suffer on her own. She needed support. And at that time, we didn't know what that support looked like because we didn't know how bad it was, but I just knew that I wasn't going to be flying away in 7 days. I booked a ticket for 7 days. I knew that wasn't going to happen. So long story short, she was admitted to the hospital again just after Christmas. And it was confirmed that the cancer had metastasized to her brain. And so at this point, we knew that it was not something that we could ignore. We didn't know how quickly it was all going to go down, but we knew that there was no further treatment. And my mom agreed and her oncologist agreed that there was nothing else we could do at this point except for end-of-life care, which meant essentially hospice. But we were in the hospital for about 4 days while they were running their tests and doing the procedures and this and that. And we got the diagnosis within the first 24 hours of being there. So the rest of the time that we spent there, we were able to do the work of coming to terms with her death, that she was going to be dying, and what that meant for us and our relationship, and what that meant to her relationship with other people. And so we spent the next several days in the hospital together. I moved in essentially in the hospital. It was Beaumont Hospital in Michigan, and they're absolutely lovely there. Their staff are lovely. They brought in a little twin bed to sleep, couch thing to sleep next to her. And I stayed by her side 24 hours a day for the next several days. And we stayed up all night. I don't know if you spend time in the hospital, you can't really sleep in a hospital, but we stayed up all night talking and sharing and processing her life and our connection. And it was the most beautiful, profound, important work that I've ever done. And it just started. That's the thing. It proceeded over the next several weeks. But that time that we spent in the hospital was like this cocoon that we were in, this vortex that we were in. And we literally were up, like it seemed like we were up constantly. And we were processing and talking and healing and teasing out the threads of the trauma between us in our relationship, and offering each other loving kindness and compassion and forgiveness. And this is where I want to make a point about your Tantra practice. At the core, Tantra is a mindfulness practice. At the very root core, it's all about cultivating presence, because presence is God. That's what it is. It is your divine consciousness that is eternal. It never dies. It never goes anywhere. It is the essence of who you are. And then we just have all this crap in front of it, right? So Tantra methods are tools to peel away those layers so that we can be more fully present, more fully conscious, more fully God in every moment. And so it was so clear to me that the ability to hold this space with my mother and for my mother during this entire time, but particularly this time in the hospital, there was no me during this time. I put all of that aside and just was an empty vessel to catch and to hold and to contain everything that she had to say and everything that she had to express, with no judgment, with no criticism, with 100% loving kindness and compassion. And praise the divine for the training that I've had in nonviolent communication and developmental trauma and all of these other practices that allowed me to receive her and give back empathy, and also the understanding and the awareness that we are not our trauma, but we are shaped by our trauma. And a lot of our painful behavior is a reflection of that trauma. And that's tragic. And yet when we understand that, we can forgive ourselves, and we can also forgive those people who traumatized us as a result of their own trauma. So this time in the hospital together was this beautiful, precious, sacred time for me and for her. But it was also a beautiful, precious, sacred time to observe her, because this is where she had to make those very hard phone calls. She had to call the people that she loved and tell them that she was dying. And what was so precious for me to observe in this was that her concern was for them. It wasn't for her. Her concern was, they're going to take this really hard. This is going to be really difficult for them. I'm really concerned about how they're going to feel hearing this. And so even in those moments when she's sharing that I'm dying, she wasn't concerned with her. She was concerned with the people that she loved and how they were going to be able to live without her. So when we initially got the diagnosis, the wheels spinning in my head were, okay, we're going to ship her back to Canada. She can do end-of-life care here. My wonderful husband, his mother is a former hospice nurse. She offered to support us with this because she knows what this is like. I have no idea. So we have this whole kind of net to catch her back on this side of the country. And so those are the wheels that were spinning in my head. But after spending several days with her, observing how many people she had in her community in Michigan that I was unaware of, and how many people, not just that she loved, but that loved her, I realized that I couldn't take her away. I realized that these were her last months on Earth, and that's what I thought at the time. I thought we were looking at 3 to 6 months. And that I didn't want to rob her and rob them of the opportunity to say goodbye and have closure. So I made a little decision to myself, like, okay, so if we're talking a matter of, you know, a couple months to 3 months, then we can stay in Michigan. If we're looking at 6 months to a year, then we'll wait 6 weeks until my husband can come back out, and then we'll move her then. So I made this decision, and I'm sharing all these details with you because I want you to understand the thread of grace that runs through an experience like this. And so the next morning, the doctor came in at like the butt crack of dawn, as they do in the hospital, and pulled me aside and showed me the CT scan, which showed what was going on in my mom's brain. And I'm not going to give you the details of that because my mom asked me not to. And he said very clearly and very straightly, I asked him, okay, well, what does this mean and how long do we have? And he said, you have a few weeks. And he said, I can't tell you if it's going to be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, but we're not talking about months. You will not be here for 3 months. You have weeks. And that confirmed for me the decision to stay. So I did not disclose this to my mother because I didn't want to crush her hope or her spirit. And so I just told her that we were going to wait on moving and just get her home and get her settled. So we were released from the hospital on New Year's Eve, and it was her last New Year's Eve. And so I made it very special for her and basically moved in with her to support her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And over the next several weeks, I had the very, again, precious honor and opportunity to shepherd my mother to her death. And what I understood about this process from living it is that the most important part of this process is not just the physical care. The physical care is important, but they can get that in a hospital or a nursing home or whatever. The most important part of this process is the emotional and spiritual and psychological processing that occurs for the person as they are saying goodbye to their life. And that is where you as a family member or a friend are absolutely indispensable. Nobody can do this work but you. Nobody can hold that space but you. A nurse is not going to sit there and listen to this person process for 3 hours at 2 a.m. A nurse is not necessarily, nurses are wonderful. So no shade at all. Like, nurses are amazing, but that's not your job as a nurse to sit with somebody and help them come to terms with their life and the nuances of that and how shit just spontaneously arises in the moment that they need to process. Like, there's no planning. It's not like we're processing between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. today. It happens at midnight. For my mom, it happened every time we put her to bed because she didn't know if she was going to wake up the next morning. So she wanted to make sure that she said everything that she could possibly say and everything that was on her mind to say before she went to sleep because she was terrified that she was not going to wake up the next day. And that is the kind of loving kindness, compassion, and care that only you as a friend or family member can offer to somebody in these last days. And it is crucial to the death process. And so this is what it means when we talk about dying well. Dying well means that you are surrounded by the people who are most important to you, that you are not isolated, that you are not alienated, that you are not alone, that you are not stuck in some room somewhere and forgotten. Dying well means having closure. It means saying thank you. It means saying I love you. It means saying please forgive me. It means saying I forgive you. And it means saying goodbye to the people who are most important to you. And that is a profound process. Not just for the dying person, but for those of us who are left behind, to be able to have closure and completion. Yeah. So now I want to give you guys some resources that helped me through this process. And my husband, being one of them, a wonderful, phenomenal resource during this time, who also came to Michigan and tucked my mom in at night and gave her solace and dried her tears and heard her fears and all of that. So again, this is what is important in this process, is the humanity of it, is the compassion and the presence, just being physically present, being emotionally present, being able to hear and receive the person, not diminish their feelings, not poo-poo their feelings, not trying to get away from their feelings because they're scared or because you're afraid of those feelings, but to be able to be present and available to receive, because you're going to hear things from these people that you have never heard before. And they're going to express, it's terrifying staring into the mouth of death. And so what comes out of us in those moments is unpredictable, but also must be heard. It's like a precious jewel and a precious gem. Would you be willing to talk just for a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. With most experiences that we have as human beings, we have some kind of a framework that we can use to approach it, whether, whatever it is. When you're in the middle of losing a parent, though, there's no framework for that. You can't have a game plan going into it. And as a matter of fact, if you do, because of the way that it kind of spontaneously works itself out, if you have a game plan, it's going to go out the window in a few minutes anyway. And so one of the key things you can do, I think, to be a support if you're dealing with somebody who is at the end of life, is to simply hold a wide open space for them to process whatever they need to process, whatever they need to talk about, whatever they need to say, to just listen. Because this one is not about you. It never is at that point. It's about the person that you're caring for. And it's about giving them the opportunity to say the things that need to be said. It's pretty remarkable. Like I look back at some of the exchanges that Sandy and I had, and there's something very profound about, like, the last conversation that I had with her, the last face-to-face conversation that I had with her was the night before I was going to be flying back to Vancouver from the Detroit area. And I knew that it was the last time I would see her alive. And she knew it was the last time she was going to see me. And so the conversation that we had was really, it took on an extra depth. It took on extra weight. And, again, listening to her express some of her fears, and to be able to say, it's understandable that you would have those fears, and to let her know that it was okay to be feeling whatever she was feeling, and that we had her back. And it was nice for me to let her know that certainly I was going to be there to care for her daughter when she was no longer there to do that. And it was nice. Like, you could just see sort of the relief on her face to know that things were taken care of. And that's kind of a big deal. Not something that you can easily put into a box, and something that you would do a disservice by trying to jam into a box. And so it's just holding that space for it is just critical. It's so important, and just holding that space of just pure love.
And for as long as it takes, that's the thing. Like, you cannot rush the process. We didn't know how long it was going to take. It could have taken 2 weeks. It ended up taking about 6 weeks, right? So there's no rushing the process. And why would you want to? So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to start going through some of the resources and dispelling some of the myths. Because again, this was, I had never done this before. I don't know how many people get this opportunity. Some of you have had it and you understand how precious it is. But for me, there were some myths and some things, some curveballs that I was not prepared for. So I want to share some of those with you so you're well informed, and give you some resources so that you can learn more. So we will be right back with more. So stay tuned. Welcome back. This is Devi Ward Erickson with my wonderful husband, Dr. Christopher Erickson, not Christopher Ward Erickson. And we are talking about the Tantra of dying well. And so we just spent this first half hour of the show sharing the very poignant and precious experience that I had, and that my husband had as well, in supporting my mother through her death, or to her death. And so she passed on February 5th, 2019, which was the Chinese New Year, Tibet New Year. Yay! So we can celebrate every year. So I want to share with you some resources now, and also some of the things that were shocking for me. So number one, resources. So because Christopher and I are practicing Tibetan Buddhists, we leaned towards Buddhist texts around this whole death process. So there is a wonderful book called The Tibetan Book of the Dead, which some of you may have heard of. And that actually gives you specific instructions for prayers to make, and words to say, and things to do as the person is approaching death, as they enter into death, and then, for the several hours and then several days and potentially weeks after they actually pass. And so all of these instructions are to facilitate the person, their consciousness as it exits the body, in realizing its true nature. And our true nature is, free, essentially, is enlightened, is freedom, is enlightened, right? We are everything and all things at once. And so in the death process, there is according to these texts, there are very precious moments that can occur in this process, that give you these opportunities to realize your God self instantaneously. Mm-hmm. And so for us as the supporters of the dying person, our job is to facilitate that as best we possibly can by reading them certain words or chanting them certain mantras or doing specific Buddhist practices at certain moments in order to facilitate that process. So do you know the author of so there's this book, Tibetan Book of the Dead, is like super dense and hard to get through, and there's different translations, and the translation that we used was like wonderful because it was so clear and easy. So he's going to go see if he can find it so we can show it to you. So I will say that all the stuff that they want you to do is really stressful for one person to do. So I was freaking myself out because they're very okay, within the first 10 minutes, you have to do this. And then in the next 20 minutes, you have to do this. So I was literally pulling my hair out, freaking out, because if she misses this opportunity, I was taking responsibility for her enlightenment, right? So it's a lot to do on your own. And then a friend shared with me, well, when they wrote this book, it was monks in the monastery and they would, take turns holding vigil. It's kind of hard if you're the only one holding vigil because you can't do it 24 hours a day. But they're very good practices, particularly if you lean towards Buddhism. And so you want to show them
Yeah, the version that we were using is this one. I don't know if you can see that very well.
It might be. It looks reversed to me.
Yeah, it looks reversed.
But let's say it's you.
It's the translation is by Guarisco and Simmons, and so this is there's a number of these that are available. A bunch of different translation. Robert Thurman has one. There's a variety of others that are out there and available. This particular version is quite accessible. Some of them are a little more stilted than others. So it's worth going to take a look for a copy of this text if you're interested in it, and looking through the different versions, and choose the one that you find most accessible.
Yeah.
Choose the one that you find easiest to read. Like the one that resonates with you best.
Yeah, because some of them are I'd rather stick hot pokers in my eyes and try to read that book. So this is what it looks like again, and we can put links to this we're going to post this and send this out, so we can put links to this particular version edition. Mm-hmm. The other book that was super helpful for me was another book called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and unfortunately I don't actually have a copy in my possession anymore because it's being shipped across the country in a pod. But this book, what I loved about this book is, even though it is about Tibetan Buddhism, it frames everything that the author talks about is from a standpoint of, well, you don't have to be a Buddhist.
Yeah.
The most important concept throughout this book was that of love. It doesn't matter what denomination, it doesn't matter what your religion is or your spiritual belief. The only thing that matters as we approach death and are dying is love. And if we focus on love, we use that love as the guiding light through what we call the bardo, or through the different, phases of death, the in-between state, whatever it is. But what they talk about in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is how when you lose your body, you're confused. You're like, wait a minute, where's my body? And it's kind of freaky. And then, who knows what's going to happen? You might go to the light, you might go to the hell realm. We don't know what's going to happen, right? But a way to maintain balance and equanimity when we do leave our bodies is to focus on love. And as we are dying in the death process itself, it is love that is the guiding light. So no matter what your spiritual belief, your spiritual tradition, love is a guiding light. And that's what I loved about this book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And again, I will post a link to the version or the edition that I read, is that they reinforce that, or the author reinforced that over and over and over again. He also gives some very practical tips and tools for, you know, when you're in the presence of a dying person, like don't talk about them when they can hear you. Even if they look like they're in a coma, they can probably still hear you. So, you know, don't ridicule them, or, you know, or just don't talk about them as if they're not there. Don't diminish them. Also, the importance of holding emotional space for them to process, allowing them to unpack their lives, because this is it, you know, like what if death happens in an instant, that's the way it happens. But if it happens over a series of weeks, it's like, this is the time where this person is unpacking, literally unpacking and coming to terms and resolution and self-awareness and understanding. And it's such a vital process. He also talks about, for people who are very, very ill, to not over-medicate them. So that is something that, you know, is you have to find a balance point with, because obviously you want to ensure that the person is not suffering and in pain. But he also counsels against over-medicating people so that they're in a stupor and they can't do any of this processing, because this is important. It's important for each of us to come to closure with ourselves. And this is what all the experts say, is we must have closure to have a good death. The art of dying well is in coming to peace with our lives, with ourselves, with the people around us, if that's possible. And I'm so grateful that I was given the opportunity to support my mom through that process of coming to resolution and coming to peace, not just between she and I, but with her life to the degree that she was able to. And were you going to say something?
I was just going to say that at that point in the process, most of us live our lives like really packing in all this emotional stuff and like creating like a big hard shell around the stuff that hurts us. And in the situation that we saw, it was really witnessing that shell breaking apart and dissolving. I mean, it was
so beautiful.
It's
to witness.
There's no words for it. Like, you can't possibly describe it. It's like literally watching somebody's whole life soften and dissolve right in front of you. All of the hurt, all of the sharp edges, all of the pointy, spiky bits, they just dissolve. It's amazing. And what's one of the things that really stands out for me, having seen that, is to recognize really how truly precious the time is that we've got. And if we can live without packing up our emotions like that, then maybe there's a lot more flow all the way through. And the dying process doesn't have to be dramatic, and it doesn't have to be painful. It's just going to be, okay, here we go.
And I want to speak to that, because that's another piece that I got from her naturopathic doctors, and then also experts. So I'm going to give, you know, in a few minutes a few other expert names, is they talk about how death is a transition, and it's like a birth. And that helped me really reframe it. So for births, it's like, you know, home birthing, and you have all your community, and you do it in the whirlpool, and it's this, you know, thing, whoa, a lot of focus. Death, it's kind of like, let's stick you in a corner and, you know, eventually you stop breathing.
Pretend you're not
but death is a birth. It's a birth into, like, it's like, you know, we come into matter and then we leave matter. And that's what the death process is. It's a birth into the ethers. It's a birth out of the physical existence. And so it deserves as much celebration and attention and presence as a birth does, because it is a transition. And again, you know, our culture just like leaves people to die on their own without the support of community and love. Again, it all boils down to love. So the Tibetan Book of the Dead, if you're inclined to Buddhism, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, regardless of your religious orientation or your spiritual orientation, fabulous. Another resource, I'm going to look it up on my phone right now because I had it bookmarked for us. And I just came across this recently, Katie Butler. So she wrote a wonderful article in the San Francisco Chronicle about how to ensure to die well, you know, how to ensure that your end of life is positive. And she wrote a book that was just published called The Art of Dying Well. So based on her article, I haven't read her book, but based on her article, this is an area of expertise for her. And I loved what she said in the article. And it's very clear and very concise and very much reflects what the naturopaths that we worked with had to say about dying well, having a good death, and also hospice. And they, of course, that's what they specialize in. So the resource of hospice, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute again, is hospice and the support that they have, but also some myths around hospice. You know, if we approach the dying process like we do the birthing process, for those of you who, you know, have perhaps had at-home births or, you know, births in hospitals, kind of things that are like to your liking, things like dim lights, soft music, you know, making the birthing room a really beautiful, sacred sanctuary. Well, that's what we did with my mom. We had her hospital bed in the living room. We had soft music. We had flowers and beauty all around her. We read to her, chanted mantra to her, stroked her, just sat with her. And, you know, all the same things. That's what I have been present for a birth. And it struck me as very, very similar process. Is really everything you can do to soothe that nervous system and soothe that person and make it as tranquil and beautiful as possible. You know, and that's the beauty of being able to die at home versus in the hospital, is you're able to control that environment. And in fact, that's one of the things that this Katie Butler talks about in this article, is how 7 in 10 Americans want to die at home, but more than half of them end up dying in the hospital or being shuttled back between the hospital and a nursing home. And that is so jarring for you. And in fact, in this death process, and in fact, in the book, both of those books, the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, they talk about how disrupting it is as you're in that active dying stage, to have a lot of movement and shifting and like how it fucking freaks you out, you know, and the necessity of having a very tranquil, peaceful environment. And I understand that not everybody is able to care for their ailing parents at home. It may be beyond your capacity, so no shame. But even in a hospital room, like they give this in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, he talks about exactly that. He talks about how to create a sacred space, even in a hospital or a nursing home or wherever you are, to help facilitate this process and make it sacred. That's the thing we want to do. This death process is sacred and it should be honored as such. So 3 resources there. The Katie, give you that just one more time, just to make sure you have it, just to make sure I have it. Katie Butler, The Art of Dying Well. So you can Google that. So the other thing that I want to talk about, and this is kind of dispelling myths, is hospice. Hospice is amazing. Praise God for the fact that we have hospice in this country and that it's covered by like Medicaid or Medicare or whatever. It's covered by everything, hopefully. It's such an amazing resource. But I was shocked that hospice was not round-the-clock care, because that's kind of the idea that you get, or I got anyway. You know, if you're not like, don't really understand this process, I thought, oh, when you call in hospice and you're golden, right? That's not the way it works. So hospice provides support to a primary caregiver. They are not the primary caregiver. And that was a shock for me. So I didn't understand that the role I was agreeing to was the primary caregiver. And what that means is you will be walking the person to the bathroom. You will be changing diapers. You will be changing bedpans. You will be administering medication. You will be calling hospice at 3 a.m. because they're having a seizure and you don't know what to do. Like, you are the primary caregiver. And they are incredible, incredible support, but they are not primary caregivers. And I encourage you to shop around for hospice services. They are the ones that we used, Arbor Hospice in Michigan, were phenomenal, amazing. And they offered services like house cleaning. Once a week, had someone come, and they don't do like the whole house, but they came for a couple hours to help, which is amazing. You know, especially if it's an elderly couple, you know, and you're taking care of each other, how are you gonna have time to do the laundry or walk down the stairs or whatever? You know, if you become immobilized, how do you have time to do any of that? So they offered house cleaning, they offered massage, they offered Reiki. So just phenomenal services. Also, if you are bringing hospice in, ask what you can do to maximize their services. So for instance, we had a bathing aide initially come in once a week. Then it became very apparent that we needed more support. So in the end, we had the bathing aide coming in 4 times a week. We had the nurse coming in once or twice a week. Then we also had volunteer support that could come in. Mm-hmm. So you can utilize the services of hospice to really give yourself support, but do not enter this under the illusion that they are the caregivers. That is going to be you. So you're going to need to make sure that you have a network of support so that you can breathe and attend to your self-care as well as, the caregiving of your loved one. Absolutely. There's something else I wanted to say. I can't remember what it was.
I think I would just mention that just in terms of like if you are the caregiver in a situation like this, it's really useful to recognize that you're going to be feeling a lot of the same emotions that they're feeling. You're going to be feeling fear. You're going to be feeling uncertainty. You're going to be feeling anger. It could come up. And one of the things that's been really, really helpful, particularly by using, say, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol, or any of these other texts, is that they give you a framework for understanding what death might be. And the basic fact is that if you're born, you're going to die. Like that's the basic fact of life. And so actually Socrates said something rather interesting at one point. He said, the most shameful thing of all is to claim to have knowledge that you do not have. And this is why he said he was not afraid of death, because for him to be afraid of death would be for him to presume that it was something that he knew enough about it to be afraid of it, to know that it was something to be afraid of. And he says, I don't know what it is, so I don't I don't know if I should be afraid of it or not. So it would be shameful for me to be afraid of it. I think having an ability, whatever framework you use, whether it's a faith framework, whether it's a logical or rational or scientific framework, whatever you want to use, to give you a framework to make sense of what the process is. And that can really help you overcome the fear. This is a very important, sacred process. I mean, that's the best word for it. And to use whatever spiritual tools you have available to you to help you through this process is a really important thing. It'll help keep you centered, which will help keep the person who is transitioning much more centered, because you're not flighty and all over the place.
Yes.
So it actually works out really, really nicely.
Yes. And so that's exactly where the Tantra came in for myself and my mother. So I'm blessed with a mother who was also Buddhist and had her own mindfulness practice. And so those were some of the things that we did together. We meditated together. We did our Buddhist practice together. If you're not a Buddhist, any kind of mindfulness practice, any kind of meditation that you can do with the person. And in fact, in this book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, they talk about how important that is, how important it is for the person, if they are spiritually inclined, to do their practice, to not like with like, oh my God, I've got to do my practice, not with anxiety, but to just do it in a relaxed, loving, easeful way. So doing mindfulness practices. Reading books, being informed. This is what, for other people who have walked this or done this transition and have shared that information, this is what it looks like. So whatever you're drawn to, we just gave a few resources. There's countless others. Follow your heart truly in this and move towards what you are drawn to in regards to a resource for understanding what this process can be like once you take your last breath. Nonviolent communication. Oh my God, like, learn empathy. What it actually is. It is the most valuable tool you will ever learn, is how to actually give empathy to yourself and another human being. So if you can learn nonviolent communication, not a variation on the theme of nonviolent communication, but nonviolent communication by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, if you can learn and integrate that tool right now today, and especially, if you're supporting someone who's in their end of life process, learn that, because it's such a grace and such a blessing. And then like I said, read Bible verse, do the rosary, whatever it is you're inclined to do, and listen to and allow that person to share their process with you. We're just here as vessels to hold that space for them and to support them. And really, I got the sense of being a shepherd, you know, really being a shepherd, walking her towards this new horizon. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and for hearing us and being present with us through this experience. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your comments. You know, did this move you? Did this touch you? Were there any ahas for you? What were your takeaways? And then my intention is to post the links to the resources that we did cite here for you. And if you need any other help, or you just want to share your story, and because you want a little bit of empathy, please feel free to reach out to us, comment under the video, comment under the blog post, or shoot us an email at connectedauthentictantra.com. Tantra is about living, and part of life is how we end it. And so these tools are useful for us at every stage of our journey. And we're so grateful and so honored to be able to offer them to you in the context that we are. So much love to you. Many blessings. Mwah. Yes. Be well. Have a good night.
Bye.